Here's my question. How can an individual thrive when they are designed to fit within a collective? When a person is just one among hundreds and they're all dressed in the same uniform, what sets them apart? How do you distinguish one from another? For costume designer Lisy Christl, this was the central question in the costuming for the movie Conclave, which was released last year and directed by Edward Berger. The movie takes place during a papal conclave, which happens when a current pope dies. All of the cardinals, with I guess voting rights, come together in the Vatican to elect a new pope. Within that period, they take an oath of secrecy and are locked in the Sistine Chapel, completely cut off from the outside world. The only way the people outside can know whether or not a new pope has been elected is through the chimney in the Vatican walls. If the smoke is black, that means a pope hasn't been chosen yet, but if it is white, a new pope has been chosen. In this movie, the dean, who essentially leads the election, is Dean Thomas Lawrence, and he is played by Ralph Fiennes. Other characters include Cardinal Aldo Bellini, an American liberal cardinal played by Stanley Tucci, Cardinal Joseph Tremblay, a Canadian moderate played by John Lithgow, Cardinal Joshua Adeyemi, a Nigerian conservative cardinal played by Lucian Msmati, Cardinal Goffredo Tedesco, an Italian traditionalist played by Sergio Castellito, and Cardinal Vincent Benitez played by Carlos Diaz. Of course, there's also Isabella Rossellini in the role of Sister Agnes, a nun who is the cardinal's head caterer and housekeeper. All of these characters with different needs and different agendas are jockeying for power, for influence, and ultimately the papacy. We will get into how the costumes reflect the inner lives of these characters, but first, hello and welcome back to A Love Letter 2. I'm your host, Danielle Olavario, and yes, I am wearing pajamas. I am in bed. The Oscars is happening in like 20 minutes. And so I'm rushing to get this episode out before it airs. But this is the third and last installation of a mini-series in the pod where I talk about some of the nominees for Best Costume Design in the Oscars from now until the Oscar ceremony. Of course, one of the two films that I didn't watch, if one of the two films that I didn't watch wins the Best Costume Design category, we might have to do a bonus Oscar episode next week. And we might have to do that anyway because I was kind of intrigued by A Complete Unknown with Timothée Chalamet ever since his speech at the SAG Awards. If you are subscribed to my Substack, I have thoughts about, the aspiration for greatness that Timothy displays in that speech. And yeah, DanielleOlavario.substack.com. Anyways, today, as I mentioned, we're looking at the movie Conclave. I loved this movie. I described it last episode as the Real Housewives of Vatican. And you know what? I stand by that because that drama is so juicy and delicious. The New York Times used this phrase, a clique of catty cardinals, which first of all, okay, alliteration. And second of all, I'm obsessed with that. That's exactly what it is. It was definitely one of my favorite films this Oscar season. I would say second only to Wicked. I'm a huge fan of Edward Berger's work on this and the way that it's essentially a political thriller dressed in a Catholic's clothes. That is so delicious to me. Now, when it comes to costume design, though, I'm going to be honest with you, it's not my front runner for Best Costume Design at the Oscars. Designing uniforms in films is a huge challenge. And I say that to say that it's not that I didn't love what Lisy Christl did with the outfits in this movie. I'm just saying there's only so much you can do with the parameters that you have in this film, you know? There's not much room to personalize the outfits for each character because everyone has to look the same. There's not much room to reflect the evolution that each character goes into as the story progresses. And then it's also a huge challenge for this movie in particular because the story is based on something that exists in real life. And so the uniforms themselves are based in real life uniforms. How do you invent a new world that way? How do you tell the story through the clothes when you're obligated to dress everyone the same way? When I looked into it though, Lisy Christl did an incredible job given, as I've said, the parameters that she had to work with. We'll get into that, but obviously this episode is going to have some spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie, I really encourage you to watch it, especially if you're Catholic. Also, I'm going to be honest, this is going to be a little bit of a shorter episode. As I've said, I'm ready for the Oscars. I'm like good to go. This week has been too much. Okay, too much. So I hope you guys understand, but yeah, let's get into it. Now, if there's one thing that was working for Lisy when she made the outfits for this film, it's that the aesthetic of the Catholic Church evokes opulence and regality by itself. If you've ever visited the Vatican City in Rome, you'd notice that place, although it is the smallest country in the world, is vast and impressive just when you think about the size of it relative to a person, and also just when you think about the power of the Catholic Church, you know? But then there's the old statues, the gold ceilings, works by legendary artists. Michelangelo, you know, famously painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and you can also see the Pieta in there. You know, this is a religion that cares a lot about how things look. There's an episode of Articles of Interest, the podcast called Clergy, and they said no one puts on a show quite like the Catholics, and as a Catholic myself, I would have to agree. But that drama also bleeds into the vestments that the clergy wears. If you've ever looked closely at what priests wear, for example, there's almost always these beautiful, ornate brocade elements in it, and then just the sheer volume of layers that they have to put on when they celebrate a mass. A priest wears a lot of garment, from the alb, which is like the white sort of like nightgown looking thing that they wear underneath everything, to the stole, which is sort of like the scarf that they have, and then of course the chasuble, which goes over everything. These things are not cheap. You know, in the Articles of Interest episode, they said that a well-made chasuble can cost anywhere from $400 to $1,200, and that's just priests, okay? In this movie, we're talking about cardinals, which, in case you didn't know, are much more senior members of the Catholic Church. So usually I stay far away from discussing the techniques it requires to put costumes together because I'm not a tailor, I'm not a seamstress, I do not feel qualified to talk about these things. But I think for this one, I really do have to mention it because given the constraints, they still managed to make the clothes pop on screen and look really impressive and regal through small changes in the garments. So the first thing that she said, Lisy, that she said she had to work with was the research it takes to build costumes for a movie like this. Obviously, these are not just clothes. You know, religious wear often have a lot of symbolism and meaning imbued in the garments, and it was really important that she got those right. For example, there are certain Catholic uniforms which have 33 buttons because Jesus died when he was 33. Okay? For those things, she said, you can't cheat. So there are a lot of technicalities that she wanted to get right, but there are a few things that she tweaked for the purposes of the film. First is that she had the uniforms made from heavier wool versus a lighter one, and I think you can really notice that when you look at how the garments move in wider shots in the film. There's a bit more gravity in the draping. That's the only way I can sort of describe it. It like flows with the wearer, but in such a way that it takes its time, you know, there's just more gravity in it. She said that the way the garments are draped in real life, this is a quote, I did not say this, looks like a curtain. So there was a lot of work involved when it came to tailoring the garments for each cardinal. The other thing is the color red that the cardinals wear. In real life, the shade of the red is more specifically scarlet. It's this brighter, orangier, sort of like almost red-orange sort of red. That red symbolizes the blood of Christ and the blood that the cardinals must be ready to shed in the service of the church. For this film, though, Lisy went for a darker hue. Obviously, she couldn't change the actual color. It has to be red, but she had some tweaks that she was allowed to do when it came to the actual shade of red that it was going to be. So here's what she told the New York Times. We went to Rome and we saw the actual cassocks and how the red color burns in your eye. It's quite orangey, the actual color. I worked with a friend of mine, Mary Heitzinger. She's a textile artist. I showed her Renaissance paintings. The reds, you can feel a color if you like it or not. And then she started to dye around these paintings like Velázquez or Francis Bacon. I would say our red is bluer and warmer. And that's definitely true. Basically, Lisy looked at older robes dating back to the 15th century through the 1960s and just noted that they were darker. She chose that darker shade because it would read better on camera, and I think that sort of jewel tone that the cassocks ended up having is much more regal than if they were the brighter color. And of course, as a viewer, if you're looking at the film for, I don't know, 2 hours or something, just much more easier on the eye. So then, let's talk about personalizing the cassocks for each character in Conclave. As I mentioned before, this is a really difficult thing to do because everyone is wearing the same thing. But through the accessories, Lisy found a way to let each character's agendas shine through their outfits. First, let's talk about the crosses that each character wears. If you look closely in the film, some are wooden, some are gold, some are silver, some are larger than others. So these are markers to give the viewers a clue about whether the Cardinal is conservative or liberal. Think of it like how in the US, the color of the ties that politicians wear would usually denote whether they're Republican or Democrat. In this film, usually, gold cross wearers are traditionalists, and silver cross wearers have more progressive views. Lisy also relied on accessories to give each cardinal their own flair. So, for example, Cardinal Tedesco is a cardinal from Venice, and if there's an antagonist in the film, it would be him. He's a conservative cardinal, a staunch traditionalist, and this is manifested in the glasses that he wears, the jewelry he has, the rings, the watches, even the way we're introduced to him. You know, he sort of saunters into the scene wearing an overcoat draped around his shoulders, very fashionista style. And it really just highlights the way he walks in like he owns the place. Tedesco has a personal agenda to be the next pope, and he's unapologetic about that. And you know, contrast that with Cardinal Lawrence, who is the protagonist of the film, a man who is modest, who prefers to stay in the background, who does not want the papacy, and you can see that he doesn't have any of the luxurious accessories that Tedesco has. Despite the bling and the opulence that the clothes in this film has, Lisy here displays such a mastery in subtlety. You know, it's really only when you look much, much closer that you realize the differences in how the cardinals wear their garments. And I love that. It makes you watch closer and pay more attention. In fact, I would even say that the whole movie has this subtlety element to it, even though it's filmed in this like very grand place and very grand things are happening. You know, for example, Ray Fiennes' character Lawrence doesn't say much. A lot of the messaging happens in the close-ups, the micro expressions he has at certain points of the film, and things like that. It is a true exercise in subtlety. By the time you see this video, the result of the best costume design category has probably already been announced. I'm hoping that it's Wicked, but we will see. This has been a love letter to. I'm your host, Danielle Olavario. Apologies for the much shorter episode. Next week, we're going to dive deeper. I haven't decided yet what movie we're going to go into next, but let me know in the comments below if you want to see anything in particular. Thank you so much for being with me and listening to this podcast. Give us a follow on our socials at A Love Letter to Podcast on everything. If you enjoyed this episode, do leave us a review wherever you're listening. It really does help the show. And of course, feel free to send me a love DM about what you thought of this episode, your thoughts on the costuming for Conclave, and whether or not you agree with whoever wins Best Costume Design tonight. I'll see you guys next week. Have a good Oscars evening, everyone. Bye.